Thank you, Speaker. Honourable Senators, I rise to speak in support of Bill S-215, an act respecting measures in relation to the financial stability of post-secondary institutions. And I would like to thank Senator Moncion for her initiative because it opens the door for a necessary and imperative conversation. I know that we can all agree on a lot of things, but we can agree that education, especially post-secondary education, is one of the most essential pillars of nation building. It is the bedrock of our prosperity, our innovation, and our place in the world in economic, scientific, and cultural terms. For individuals, it leads to careers and jobs, but simply measuring the value of a good post-secondary education cannot be done simply in economic terms, because that misses the mark. It builds people, it builds a whole person and a whole community. The fact that education is a provincial responsibility should not and must not allow us here in Parliament to simply sit back and shirk our responsibility to the nation. And we can do this in a respectful manner, as Senator Moncion has proposed in her legislation. Underpinning the health of our post-secondary education institutions is their financial viability. And the scene here is not pretty. In fact, it's a bit of a mess. And if we were to be completely honest about this mess that universities and colleges, especially small and rural institutions, find themselves in, then we would perhaps look at ourselves here on the Hill. We have allowed ourselves to get sucked into a financial model that is unsustainable and needs a serious rethink and reboot. The system relies on federal transfers, provincial grants to institutions, and on tuition fees. The federal government also funds research fellowships directly, and if there's a silver lining in the cloud, it is the announcement in the 2022 budget of an increase in research that is allocated to universities. A mix of revenue streams is generally considered to be a good business model, but this is sadly not the case here. Outside of federal funding of research fellowships, the rest of the revenue model is in distress. First, government funding from all levels of government, which is their mainstay, has been either stagnant or decreasing. Between 1992-93 and 2015-2016, the federal government's contribution decreased by 40% less per student. Second, some provinces have capped tuition fees, and the demand for domestic students is limited. These cuts hurt students most. Many universities lean now on part-time or adjunct professors, which no doubt has a knock-on effect on impacting the quality of education our students are getting. In fact, research studies show that 1 in 4, maybe even 1 in 5 students in Ontario colleges and universities are graduating with a literacy and numeracy level that do not meet the OECD standards. Just imagine that. And provincial funding for universities is a patchwork. Some provinces fund by quotas, others by student enrollments, others give grants. But regardless, the system is in stress. For example, the province of Alberta last year cut $135 million from operating budgets for universities. Manitoba has cut $10 million in funding for post-secondary institutions over the last 3 years. And let's then layer over this stressful financial situation the impact of the COVID crisis. Nationwide, universities and colleges faced a $2.5 billion shortfall. In my province of Ontario, the shortfall was $1.7 billion. The University of Alberta is facing a significant shortfall of $120 million, and the same is true for Dal University in Halifax. So, of course, post-secondary institutions have looked to other ways to generate revenue, and for many, this has meant international students. Tuition fees for international students is 5 times higher than that of domestic students. On average, international students pay $32,000 in tuition annually compared to an average of $6,500 for Canadian kids. For an international student in Canada, Canada is an attractive place. Expensive as the fees are, They are much cheaper than other comparative jurisdictions. In addition, students are allowed to work here under certain conditions, and there is a clear pathway to permanency for foreign students. No wonder then that we've seen a dramatic increase in the number of international foreign students coming to Canada. In 2010, there were just 142,710 international students. By 2019, this number had grown to 388,782 students who collectively contributed $22 billion to our economy. And this is a good thing. It is to our credit, because it was a national imperative to give Australia and the US some competition in this field. However, most of the schools that attract international students are the big urban schools, such as U of T, McGill, or UBC. Smaller and sometimes more rural schools struggle to attract their share of these students. Laurentian University, whose bankruptcy precipitated this bill, only had 3% of its student population comprised of international students. Nipissing University, which is also under financial stress, has a total of roughly 60 international students out of a student body of 4,500. So smaller institutions are missing out on the only other source of alternative revenue. Perhaps immigration, refugee, citizenship should consider fast-tracking student applications, giving preference to student applications who are destined for smaller institutions as an incentive to study and stay in smaller places. And we all know how very, very fed up international students are with the backlog of approvals. Perhaps this could get the train moving in the right direction. I am all in favor of attracting the best and the brightest to Canadian schools, but I'm appalled that the general financial health of our post-secondary institutions depends so much on international students. It's a bit like predicating that all hip surgeries in Canada will be paid for by international patients. I hope we all realize that this outsourcing of revenue is neither healthy nor desirable for Canada in the long term. And it's not good for students either, whether they are national or international. And lest we are left with the impression that these international students are all, rolling around in fancy cars and staying in fancy mansions. Colleagues, that is not the case. Many scrape together the fees, and their families face significant hardship, and the parental expectations on these poor, lonely students are extreme. The Toronto Star has documented these experiences, and they have determined that despite the fact that many are from modest backgrounds, they pay hefty tuition fees for a chance not just to study, but to stay in this country. But they face difficult challenges, unforgiving timelines, social isolation, parental stress, and are often prone to exploitation by employers and others. If you lived in my city, you would have heard about the suicides by international foreign students, and in fact, the sex trafficking ring that is operated by exploiters of female international foreign students who are here, have no protection, and cannot meet their rent. And so this, though, is a tragedy of our own making. We shouldn't be burdening international students without providing adequate supports for them, just so our institutions can stay afloat. The end, in this case, may not justify the means. I don't want to go further on the plight of international students because I believe very firmly that this is a wonderful subject, an important subject for a committee study all on its own. But I do think we need to rethink the financial health of our post-secondary institutions. This is why I welcome the intent of this bill and support that, if passed, the minister would develop a proposal for federal initiatives, underlying federal initiatives, to reduce the risk of bankruptcy and insolvency, protect students, staff, and faculty in the event that an institution becomes bankrupt or insolvent, and support communities that would be impacted by an institution becoming bankrupt or insolvent. Further, in deliberating on this matter, the designated minister may also want to think about the role of the federal government in supporting universities which promote French language degrees and diplomas as more than simply places of education, but as an essential, imperative foundation of a bilingual nation. A different consideration, apart from student enrollment or a decline in the Francophone population outside Quebec, needs to be considered. Senator Moncion has mused about direct transfers to French language departments or colleges at a university, and a case could be made that this falls within federal jurisdiction because it is about strengthening the bilingual foundations of our country. And we feel the impact of this on the Hill. We have debated and discussed and bemoaned the lack of French language interpreters, and which means that we cannot do our work as much as we would like to. And I think the Hill needs to pay importance to this challenge as well. Of course, always we need to stay within our constitutional boundaries and not wander too far away from our lane, as Senator Martin has warned us. But this proposal calls for the federal minister to engage with provincial governments, consult with stakeholders, and propose federal initiatives and solutions so that the sustainability of our post-educational systems is strengthened. Colleagues, the second component of Senator Moncion's bill is a very important loophole. She has identified a very important loophole that needs to be looked at. It seeks to prevent publicly funded post-secondary institutions from having recourse to the Companies Creditors Arrangement Act, ACCA, or the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act, the BIA, not to be mixed up with the other BIA we are focusing on, to prevent similar situations to what happened at Laurentian University. The question really is whether the CCAA, which is under federal jurisdiction, is the right place for colleges and universities to go if they are facing financial issues. I just browsed the web and looked at a list of companies that have claimed insolvency protection under the CCAA in the last 3 months, and here's what I got: a sports franchise, a real estate corporation, a water management company, and a pizza company. The Act is in essence for the private sector, and one must really ask how a publicly funded university fell into this crowd. As we know from Senator Martin's speech, it did not have to be this way. The Auditor General of Ontario, which studied Laurentian University, concluded that it did not have to file for CCAA protection. Instead, despite being offered more money by the province, it strategically planned and chose to take steps to file for creditor protection, which prompted Ontario's Auditor General Bonnie Lysyk to comment, "The repercussions of this filing were profound and stirred up strong reactions, especially in Sudbury, where the university is an important employer, an important contributor to the social and economic fabric of the community. And by opting for creditor protection under the CCAA, Laurentian was able to bypass provisions in its collective agreements, allowing the administration to effectively terminate more senior employees and clear a number of long-standing union grievances. Laurentian removed 36% of its programs, fired 195 staff, which severely impacted the aspirations of over 930 students. The Auditor General concluded there is a strong argument that the CCAA, an important tool used in the private sector, is an inappropriate remedy for public entities. There are certain principles held high in the public sector: transparency, accountability, the primacy of the public interest, that make the CCAA court-ordered protection a detrimental choice for public entities. Today, it is Laurentian that has chosen this path. Tomorrow, it could be a hospital or a museum, for all we know. We need to protect the public interest in ensuring the health of our public institutions and close this loophole. In conclusion, colleagues, I support this bill, and wish to have your support in sending it to committee.